All right. Hey, guys, this is Gabriel Fancher, and I am the program director here at the Political Economy Research Institute, the PERI for short. And I have the great pleasure of interviewing Thomas Savage today. He is with the Center for State Fiscal Reform with ALEC. And he has done a great policy study for us here at the PERI. I'm holding it in my hand, and you can probably if you click the right link, you will be able to get your hands on this. But he's done a great study about the Tennessee public pensions and how it's a model for reform. And so, Thomas, thank you for joining me today. Would you like for me to call you Tom or Thomas?
You can call me Tom. And thanks.
All right, awesome. So, I'm going to start from the top. A majority of workers do not receive pensions, right? So can you just start with telling us what a pension is?
Sure. So when I'm talking about a pension, I refer to the technical term is called defined benefit. And so, that the benefit, it's a little different across the states, but generally it's that you are, when you're in a public employee position, you're working a certain number of years, and when you retire, you receive a paid benefit every month for the rest of your life. And if you pass away within a certain window of time, your spouse continues to receive those benefits. And those benefits are based on a calculation of a couple of different things, including your final average salary, any sort of overtime, and then the number of years that you were in service in that particular position.
So we get that magic number, right?
Yeah. And
then they get that for forever, right? Until they pass away and their spouse passes away, perhaps.
Yep. So in some cases, if you in some cases, your spouse might not get it if,
depending on how you set it up.
It's a bad thing, but it's where people, one of the benefits of modern medicine is that people are living much longer. And, I think that is one of the challenges of retirement systems today. Many of the retirement systems were initially put in place when life expectancy was much lower. And not to say that people living longer is a bad thing. It's an amazing thing. I think, it's now especially during the time where everybody's sort of tightening their belts, it's time to consider how we can help retirement systems adapt for years to come.
Okay. So when it comes to pensions, who controls these government pensions?
So those pensions, they're often managed. So for Tennessee, specifically for Tennessee, pensions are managed by the Tennessee retirement system, the Consolidated Retirement System, TCRS. That was established in 1972 by an act of the Tennessee General Assembly, and it consolidated several different pension systems, retirement systems for state employees, public school teachers, higher education employees, and employees of certain participating local governments and entities. And then there was the board of trustees there consists of 20 members. 9 members are what we call ex officio members. So that's somebody by virtue of their position in the state government gives them an ability to be on that board from the executive, legislative, and judicial branches. Another 9 members are active employees, and then there are 2 retired members as well.
Okay. All right. And so, but every state has some form of this, right? Basically.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay. There aren't a lot of public companies that are left with pensions, but so mostly is it state that handles most of your pensions now?
Yes. There are a few private sector pension plans out there now, but nowadays those are fewer and far between, and quite often in the private sector we see more of what's called technically a defined contribution, but you guys all know that as a 401k plan. So
right.
Where it's up to you to set aside pre-tax dollars, and your employer will also contribute will match up to a certain amount.
And that's the defined part, right? There's
Yeah, defined contribution.
this side of it, right?
Exactly. So it's up to you to make those contributions while you're working, and then upon retirement, you have to budget those funds accordingly.
And so with a pension, I'm here, you hear in the news a lot that there are lots of public pensions that are underfunded. Like, why do you think there are so many that are underfunded?
So that's a great question, Gabriel. There are a lot of reasons. It's not just one singular cause. But one thing I've seen across all 50 states. So here at ALEC, we study public pensions in our annual report, Unaccountable, Unaffordable, and we look at public pension plans across the 50 states. Quite often, they're underfunded because state governments overpromise benefits to public workers and then don't adequately fund those promises.
Okay, all right.
State governments aren't making the necessary contributions every year, but they're overpromising, and quite often with pension investments as well, they often try to chase. They call it chasing returns and investing pension assets into very riskier assets in order to try to chase that, try to get that high risk, high reward. But if investments have a bad year, those plans lose big time.
I see. So how do they get away with that? Right? Like how do they do that?
So it's a couple of things. It's, for one, the pension accounting is very complicated. It's a very niche issue.
Okay. How so? Like what makes it very complicated?
So it's there are a lot of little things that sort of go into calculating how benefits look, and one of those major important things is something called the discount rate.
Okay, what's a discount rate?
Discount rate, put it simply, it looks at the inability for a plan to back out on those pension promises. And for many states, pensions are obligated either by the state constitution, state statute, or through what we call the common law contractual approach. So that's if employees don't feel that the employer is adequately contributing to the pension plans, they can take the employers to court.
Okay.
And so, but in several states, you have constitutional obligations. That's like if there are any alterations to pension benefits, that actually constitutes a breach of contract, and employees can sue.
Wow. Okay.
Basically what we're saying is that it's for many states, it is they cannot not back out of these retirement promises. And so in order to reflect that, you use a very low discount rate. So that's around 2 or 3%. And that is based on the yield of a U.S. Treasury, the yield curve of a U.S. Treasury bond.
Okay. And so when they're using that, you mentioned something about smoothing assets. Do they use a discount rate to smooth assets?
So that's actually something interesting about public pensions, is that the smoothing assets, that looks at the investment portfolio of a pension.
All right.
That looks at the level of risk. The assumed rate of return is used to look at the level of risk on pension assets. And like I was saying before, pensions have been investing in riskier assets over the years. Over the past 20 years, lower interest rates have caused U.S. Treasury bonds to have lower yields. Many of the public pension plans were invested in U.S. Treasury bonds.
Which are traditionally safe, right?
Yes, traditionally safe assets, because states knew we have to guarantee these pension promises.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to invest in safe assets. But as the yield has dropped, instead of doing something politically unpopular like raising taxes or cutting benefits, many pension plans such as California, Illinois, New Jersey have tried to chase returns and invest in riskier and riskier assets.
I see. So basically, if you're running a pension fund, you
Mhm.
have some different levers you can pull. You can raise taxes and put more money in, right?
Yep.
You can cut benefits that you're paying to people or planning to pay to people, right?
Yep.
And then the third option is to invest in something that's going to get you a better return, or at least
Yes.
hope that you get a better return.
Of course, you can hope, but of course, there's nothing is guaranteed.
Right, and so that's where the problem comes in, right?
Yeah.
Because the
Yep.
payments at the end are guaranteed.
Yep.
Like as you were saying, right? That there's constitutional amendments saying that they have to be paid in some states, right?
Tennessee actually, believe it or not, is part of that the common law contractual approach. So they don't have a constitutional amendment, but a state like Illinois, for example, does have that constitutional amendment. They attempted to reform the pension system by making some slight adjustments to their cost of living calculator.
Mm-hmm.
Many of the Illinois public sector unions took the state to court, and the state found that the constitutional guarantee upheld. And so those reforms made on cost of living adjustments were completely rolled back in Illinois.
Okay.
And to put it into perspective, Illinois has the second highest unfunded liabilities after California in the country. But I would say Illinois is in a much worse position than California because, at least for now, although I see people are leaving California in droves by the day, California still has a sizable tax base, whereas Illinois, its tax base has shrunk tremendously over the past 20 years, and they're sort of stuck in a corner.
So because they're underfunded, what kind of risk does that mean for the cities and states that do have an underfunded pension? What kind of risk are there?
So it's that causes underfunded pensions. We see it like it's often referred to as quote unquote soft debt because it's not something that you put in a bond or it's not something that goes into a bond or anything, but it is something like with many of these states, these benefits are guaranteed.
Mm-hmm.
As if states aren't properly funding those promises over time, those costs build up and up. And then when people come to retire, they say, they reasonably expect their benefits, and states start diverting more funding toward paying down those promises that they've made. And instead, they miss out on opportunities to cut taxes for their residents. That funding that could have gone to things like education or infrastructure spending or public safety gets diverted away to keep paying down these promises.
So that's the real issue, right?
Exactly.
Is that money that could be going to those things ends up going into these underfunded promises they've made.
Exactly. If they're promising more and more and they're not properly funding those promises, those pension liabilities will crowd out spending for other, for essential services.
So how do they get away with that? Like, is there not a lot of transparency on these things?
So, I will say pension transparency has greatly improved over the past couple of years, but these were fairly new developments.
So that's a recent phenomenon, basically, right?
Public pension reporting has never been as good as it is right now, I will say.
Okay.
Most recently, the Government Accounting Standards Board, also known as GASB, issue public statements, and they advise how governments conduct certain accounting practices, general practice. That organization, it really doesn't have it doesn't have teeth because it's not really a government agency, but usually most states follow along with their general best practices. And so the recent statements on pension funding, statements 67 and 68, required greater transparency, greater access to plan information, investment education, publicly available financial documents and actuarial valuations for each pension plan going back a couple of years. And I will say, it's some states have sort of lagged, some other states have led. And I will say on this, particularly for Tennessee, one thing that made this project all the more easier was the accessibility of the TCRS and the ease I had, going onto that website and just having everything right there. But of course, there's always ways to improve it. They could publish, they could look to publish things, always make sure that you're publishing things in a timely manner. One thing I've actually, for our continuing publication here at ALEC on pension and other, state debt liabilities, I actually recently just checked about a half an hour ago, and normally states will publish financial documents on June 30th. That's the end of the fiscal year for most states. As of a half an hour ago, California still has not published their latest set of financial documents. So they are about a month and a couple of days delinquent. And last year, for example, the state of Illinois didn't publish their documents until just after Labor Day.
Wow.
When everyone was expecting these numbers to be out, June 30th at the beginning of the summer, it got published very quietly over the Labor Day weekend. And because with Illinois, a lot of what was being reported in there is not good news.
I see. So, but you say that Tennessee has some good news?
Yes, actually, yeah. Tennessee is, as the title suggests, Tennessee is definitely a model for pension reform.
Okay. What are we doing right?
Yep. So starting in 2014, so passed just before that, all new public employee hires were enrolled in what was called the hybrid system.
Mm-hmm.
So the hybrid system is a mix of our traditional pension that we talked about and the 401k that we mentioned. So the pension side of the benefit is a little bit smaller than what's called the legacy plan, which is all the employees hired before July 1st of 2014, the old pension system, and they still have to wait some time to be vested. So that means you have to commit a certain number of years to the job before you're eligible to start receiving benefits. But the other side of that is with this 401k plan, they were able to start paying into it and saving, and that money was theirs right away.
I see.
And I'd say one of the benefits of a 401k system, while payments during retirement aren't as generous as a pension, it has greater flexibility than a pension. And the thing about a 401k is, you change jobs, however much young people like myself change jobs quite frequently. Savings in a 401k account will follow you to whatever job you go, whether, if you're in the public sector and then you go work in the private sector for a number of years, that 401k is going to follow you. And you can always, if you boomerang back and forth between jobs,
roll it around with you, right? Yeah.
Exactly. It follows you. It's flexible. It's adaptable. It's the kind of retirement savings you want for a very dynamic economy.
Right. Whereas if you're in this, if you're in a pension plan, it's not dynamic. You have to stay at that company for a certain amount of time, right, before you get any benefits whatsoever. So
exactly. And if you leave that job, you'll start paying into it right away. But if you leave that job before you're vested, all those retirement savings don't follow you. You lose all of that money that you had saved.
Right. Another thing that you mentioned in there earlier in our conversation and in the report itself was that states were taking more chances and getting a little bit more loose with what they invest the money in. For instance, one of the things you mentioned was that in Alabama, and there are some other states too, where they're allowed to use this pension investment to make and encourage economic development, which a lot of people, it sounds like a pretty good idea, right? Let's take some money and let's create businesses here in Tennessee. We don't do that. Is that a good idea? Is that a bad idea?
I think, while the investment strategy in Alabama sounds, it sounds very lofty. It sounds great. but it actually is very high risk and dangerous. And you know, for those that are not as investment savvy, Alabama invests in things like real estate and private equities, and those are the high risk, high reward. And the Wall Street Journal actually wrote at the end of last year that the Alabama retirement system was banking that the latest Star Wars movie did well in theaters because they had invested in these movie theaters and these sort of these new pavilions where you have the movie theater and restaurants sort of around it, which of course is very risky. Whereas, you know, the Tennessee retirement system, those investments are managed by the TGRT, the Tennessee Retiree Group Trust.
Okay.
And so their main goal, their primary objective, and I'll quote it right here, I'll quote it, you know, straight from the document, is to establish a stable, diversified investment portfolio that in the long term will meet or exceed the assumed rate of return as adopted by the board in order to provide sufficient liquidity to pay beneficiaries in a timely manner. So very fancy, but basically what they're saying is our goal is to provide a good retirement investment at reasonable risk for the retirees. And one thing I will say is that the TGRT, and you'll see in the paper, the TGRT has pretty much closely followed the S&P 500. It's predictable, it's stable, and you know, when you have that predictable, you know, that less volatile, predictable investment returns, that makes, you know, estimating cost, like upcoming annual costs for the year and what contributions you're going to make, that makes that a little bit more predictable too. Whereas Alabama, you know, they've taken retiree savings and treated it like venture capital. Like you don't want to take your retirement savings and invest it in things like golf courses and movie theaters. Like you go to like the guys on Shark Tank for that kind of stuff, like the guys who are looking to invest in high risk businesses and have the capital to spend. You don't want to do that with people's retirement savings.
Sure.
So while economic development is a very lofty ideal, I think the evidence shows that it hasn't worked for Alabama, and Tennessee is doing the right thing by just looking at providing that, you know, that good investment return for for their retirees.
So another thing inside the paper, you mentioned the following states: Wisconsin, Michigan, Tennessee, Alabama, Illinois, and Connecticut. I was wondering, why did you choose those states?
So in our ALEC report, Unaccountable, Unaffordable, we look at all 50 states. I wanted to look at some standout examples, both, you know, good and bad cases, and for this study. And there are some states, you know, Tennessee can learn from the other 50 states. A couple of states, like, you know, Wisconsin, and some things done in Michigan can be models for what Tennessee has done. And then places like Illinois and Connecticut are models of what not to do.
I see. Okay. Are there any states that are like, so is Tennessee doing it the best? Like, or is there?
I would say
other states.
I will say Tennessee, and you know, several years running, even before I came on at ALEC, and you'll check out our annual report, Unaccountable, Unaffordable. For every year running of that report, Tennessee has had the lowest unfunded liabilities per capita in the 50 states.
Wow.
And it has been and it's gotten into the top 10 in something called the funding ratio, and that's your pension assets divided by your pension liabilities, and that gets you to a percentage. The American Actuarial Society recommends that you stay at 100% or greater. So, but unfortunately, no pension plan is exactly at that. We use our risk-free discount rate. I could talk about that in a little bit. You know, but Tennessee right now is number 6 in our annual study.
Okay, number 6. So we know that there are some states in some far more dire situation like Illinois and California, but are there what states are better than Tennessee right now?
So I would say, good models are Wisconsin, uh,
Okay.
Utah. In the study that I mentioned, there are some good things about the Michigan pension system. Some of their plans have transitioned to either a hybrid or a full, what we call full defined contribution, where everybody's contributing to just their 401ks. Wisconsin and Maine have adopted what we call cost sharing measures. So specifically for example, Wisconsin, that has the highest funding ratio in the 50 states. The Wisconsin pension system basically says that for investment losses, the employer, the state, and the public employees have to split the costs of that full loss. So Wisconsin, it creates an incentive not to invest in these risky assets or do anything crazy with investments, because it gives them, for lack of a better phrase, skin in the game.
Sure.
You're it's not just the state. It's not just the state managing these retirement investments far off. It's this cost sharing where the state and the employees are sharing the risk.
I see. Yeah. Oh, so you mentioned that Wisconsin has like automatic triggers for contribution rates, right? So like if the market goes down, then they're going to have to contribute more. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes.
Okay. And then they also have cost of living adjustments. Do you guys have model legislation so that other states can do that, or
Definitely. That's actually, one of the things that ALEC works on, is model policies on, we have several different model policies, one of which I'd like to highlight is the Statement of Principles on Sound Pension Practices. And I'm happy to share that link with you.
yeah, we'll put it all in the show notes, and so that way
Excellent.
you can take a look at it.
Excellent. And so those things, some of those things we've talked about: stability, predictability, adequacy, affordability, making sure you're not overpromising and underfunding, transparency, which we've talked about is very important. Responsibility, that's that risk sharing that like Wisconsin has. Transportability, liquidity, safety, responsibility, and ownership. And these are some guiding principles for public pension managers to take and look at, and consider when looking to make good pension reforms to their pension systems. And that'll help keep those pension systems sustainable for many years to come.
That's our goal, right? We want to take care of those that are retired and depending on these things.
Exactly.
Also take care of the taxpayers as well, right?
Exactly. It's not putting an undue burden on taxpayers, and it's also making sure that the things that are being promised are delivering, and we're not just letting it all putting it all up to chance. And I think some of that is by making reforms for new hires. One improvement that could be made for many pension systems, not just Tennessee, is looking at switching new hires to a full defined contribution system.
Yeah, that was one of the questions that are there any states that have made that kind of switch yet?
So a couple of Michigan plans have.
Oh, wow.
And it's not the full Michigan. So some of the public employee retirement systems there, very recently the teachers retirement system as well. But there are several plans that are still in the defined benefit category. And if you see the report, it's because there are still some pension plans that have not made these necessary changes. Michigan still has a pretty high amount of unfunded liabilities. And the thing is, it's like pension reform can be very politically difficult because, you don't see these results overnight. But Tennessee made these reforms. Now it's 6 years ago, when the economy was starting to recover from the 2008 recession.
Mm-hmm.
But you're seeing
those have worked in our favor. Then I take it.
Exactly. The thing is, when the economy takes a hit, it's everybody feels it. But you'll see, I think we'll see once the dust settles that states like Tennessee, states like Wisconsin, states like Maine will have weathered this recession better than many of the other states.
And that's good for the other things that we depend on for government, like, police,
Exactly.
fire protection, and
Exactly.
school. I can go on, but
Exactly.
So let's see. Is there anything else that you feel like I missed? I mean, like I read this. I thought it was really well written. It's written in a manner that the average person can read it and understand it. You even do a good job of explaining the discount rate, which was, it's a little bit of a confusing thing, but I thought it was great. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I'd appreciate. Thank you, Gabriel. I appreciate that. I guess I would say, always when thinking of retirement systems, think of the future. Think of how can, it's very easy to rest on your laurels and say, yeah, we're doing really great now. But you want to say it's like, how can we stay competitive for tomorrow?
Okay.
That's why, it's like Tennessee is definitely, it's one of those states that can be a model for the rest of the country. And I think they're doing a great job, but I think there's always room for improvement. You can always say there's room for improvement.
Well, and I'm hoping to get this into the hands of some state legislators, and so they can work on some of those improvements. I think, making sure we keep moving toward more of a defined contribution is one of the ways we can improve, right?
Yes, definitely.
We could lower the discount rate, right? That would be another way.
Yes. So I don't know if I could talk a little bit more about the discount rate. So it goes into this idea of present value.
Okay.
We say, even if in a world where there is no inflation, would you let's assume there's no inflation for the ease of things. Would you rather have $500 now or $500 a year from now? You still want it now, even if
take it now. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it's my money and I need it now.
Right.
So it's present value helps put these dollar amounts, what's going to be owed in the future in present value in today's dollars terms.
I see. Okay.
And the lower the discount rate, like we're saying, the lower the discount rate, the better that reflects the way most states are locked into these pension promises.
Okay.
And so states have to be prepared to pay the promises that they've made.
So if the discount rate is higher, does that make it where they can take on more risk, or
where the discount rate is higher, that makes it look like the unfunded liabilities are a little lower.
Gotcha. Okay.
So it makes it look like, that's the thing. If you pick the right discount rate, it can look like unfunded liabilities are very low. But personally, we've found through our research here at ALEC and through my research doing this project with PERI, it's that the economist Joshua Rao at Stanford University put it best in his congressional testimony. You have to show that ability that it's like states can't back out of these promises. And that's, you want to use a low discount rate to show that.
I see. Okay. And so Tennessee could stand to lower that and then have to show that they're far more interested in paying the bill at the end of the day, I guess, right? Am I right?
Yes, exactly. So right now, actually, so Tennessee and most states use what's called a blended discount rate, and that's set up by that organization, GASB.
Gotcha.
Part of their pension reforms, which the GASB said you can use a very high discount rate to value liabilities that you have covered by plan assets, and you use a very low discount rate for the unfunded liabilities. And so you get what's called the blended discount rate, which for most states is somewhere in the ballpark between 7% and 8%.
Okay.
Tennessee's liabilities for the hybrid plan and for the legacy plan are 7.25, 7.25%.
And you'd like to see that lowered?
We would like to see that a little bit lower. So at ALEC, we use a floating risk-free discount rate, and that's based on the yield curve of a U.S. Treasury bond.
Mm-hmm.
Anywhere in the ballpark between 2 and 3%. We also use what's called a fixed discount rate, and that's pegged at 4.5%.
Okay.
Just to measure, so when we measure liabilities over time. You'll see in the paper, there are a couple of charts that show that even slight changes to the discount rate mean a world of difference with how much unfunded liabilities are costing.
That's a lot of good news. So if someone reads this report and they have questions, are you available? Can they reach out to you? Are you on Twitter?
Definitely. I'm on Twitter. Actually, my specific Twitter handle is I forget my specific Thomas_Savage. You could also reach out to me via email at tsavidge@alec.org.
Okay.
My last name is Savage, but I have no relation to the Macho Man. Differently, but
it's too bad.
Feel free. I'm on Twitter. You could reach out to me via my ALEC email too. I'm more than happy to take questions.
That's great. That's great. Thank you again for making time for me today, and thank you for writing this report for us. I look forward to getting it into the hands of the people, and if they have questions, they can reach out to you.
Thanks for having me, Gabriel.
Thank you.